A soldier's uniform tells you almost everything about the war he's about to fight, the terrain he expects to cross, and the mistakes his army made trying to figure that out in advance. This video documents every major uniform and camouflage pattern the United States Army has issued from the Second World War to today. And one pattern on this list became such a notorious failure that soldiers nicknamed it after a fictional planet because it seemed to work everywhere, except actual Earth. That uniform is coming later in this video. We start in the Second World War. M1941 field jacket and olive drab wool uniform, the standard American combat uniform when the war began. This simple olive drab wool ensemble prioritized warmth and durability over camouflage entirely, since American doctrine at the time simply hadn't caught up with the idea that blending into terrain mattered as much as staying warm. Herringbone twill fatigues, a lighter cotton work uniform originally intended for training and manual labor. HBT fatigues ended up being worn extensively in combat, especially in the Pacific, because their lightweight fabric handled tropical heat far better than heavy wool. M1943 field uniform, a major redesign introduced partway through the war. This layered system let soldiers add or remove insulating pieces depending on conditions. A genuinely practical improvement born from hard lessons learned fighting through European winters. Frogskin camouflage, one of America's earliest true camouflage patterns. This reversible jungle and beach pattern saw limited issue in the Pacific, though its resemblance to certain German patterns actually caused enough friendly confusion in Europe that it was pulled from issue there entirely. Moving into the post-war and Korean War years. M1950 field uniform, an evolution of the wartime layered system, refined based on lessons from fighting in brutally cold Korean winters, where earlier equipment had proven dangerously inadequate. Mountain and Arctic uniform variants, specialized cold weather gear developed specifically for the mountainous Korean terrain, reflecting the Army's growing recognition that a single uniform simply couldn't serve every climate the cold war might demand. Then came Vietnam, and a genuine shift toward camouflage as standard doctrine. OG 107 utility uniform, a simple solid olive green fatigue uniform. This became the default combat and work uniform for most of the 1960s. Plain and practical rather than camouflaged, since jungle camouflage was still considered a specialized rather than universal requirement. ERDL pattern, developed by the Army's Engineer Research and Development Laboratories. This mottled green and brown jungle pattern saw limited but genuine combat issue late in Vietnam, primarily among special forces and reconnaissance units rather than the general infantry. The 1980s brought the pattern most people picture when they think of classic American military camouflage. Woodland battle dress uniform, introduced in 1981 as part of the new battle dress uniform system. This large blob green, brown, and black pattern became one of the most recognizable military camouflages on Earth, serving American soldiers for over 2 decades across training exercises, the invasion of Panama, and the opening phases of the Gulf War. 6-color desert battle dress uniform, nicknamed the chocolate chip pattern for its distinctive brown blotches on a tan background. This was rushed into production for the 1991 Gulf War, and though effective in the open desert, it was fighting in. Soldiers often joked it looked more like camouflage for a candy bar than a battlefield. 3-color desert pattern, a simplified successor to the chocolate chip pattern. This cleaner tan, brown, and pink-toned camouflage replaced it through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, offering better concealment without the busy, high-contrast blotches of its predecessor. Now for the pattern that became a genuine cautionary tale in military procurement history. Universal Camouflage Pattern, This is the uniform referenced at the beginning of this video. Introduced in 2004 as part of the Army combat uniform, this gray-green digital pixel pattern was designed to work across woodland, desert, and urban environments simultaneously. In practice, soldiers quickly nicknamed it Aggressor Pattern or joked it belonged to Star Trek's fictional aggressor forces, because the design meant to blend in everywhere ended up standing out almost everywhere instead. And the Army eventually admitted the pattern had been adopted without adequate combat testing. Learning from that expensive mistake, the Army moved decisively towards something proven: Operational Camouflage Pattern, commonly called Scorpion W2. This pattern was adapted from a design already extensively field-tested by Special Operations units, and it replaced the failed Universal pattern beginning in 2015, finally giving conventional soldiers a camouflage that had actually been proven effective in real combat conditions before being issued. Army-wide multicam, though technically a commercial pattern rather than an official Army issue, multicam saw widespread informal and specialized use throughout Afghanistan and Iraq before directly inspiring the eventual Scorpion W2 design. Proof that sometimes the best solution comes from watching what troops were already buying for themselves. Beyond combat uniforms, dress and service uniforms tell their own story. Army Service Uniform, the modern dress uniform worn for formal and everyday professional settings. Its dark blue coat and lighter trousers replaced an older green service uniform in the 2000s, Army Greens. Revived in 2020 as a deliberate callback to the classic World War II-era service uniform, this pinks and greens-inspired dress uniform was reintroduced, specifically to restore a sense of historical continuity and tradition that soldiers and veterans alike had said newer designs were missing. Physical Fitness Uniform. The Army's standardized workout gear evolved from simple gray t-shirts and shorts into a more structured, moisture-wicking system reflecting broader advances in athletic and performance fabric technology. A handful of specialized and transitional uniforms round out the full picture. Tiger stripe camouflage. Though more closely associated with other branches, limited Army Special Forces units wore variations of this striped jungle pattern during Vietnam, adapted informally from patterns used by South Vietnamese forces. Desert Night Camouflage Pattern. A specialized low-visibility pattern developed for night operations in desert environments, used primarily by Special Operations units where standard daylight patterns proved less effective after dark. Extended Cold Weather Clothing System. A modern layered system replacing older Arctic gear, designed using contemporary insulating materials to keep soldiers effective in extreme cold without the bulk of earlier generations of winter equipment. Improved Physical Fitness Uniform. A further refinement of Army athletic wear, incorporating updated fabric technology and a more standardized professional appearance across the force. There's an entire additional layer of uniform history that rarely gets covered outside dedicated military history circles, but that filled genuinely important roles across the decades. Class A Green Service Uniform. Worn from the 1950s through the early 2000s, this simple forest green dress uniform became the default professional appearance for generations of soldiers, before being phased out in favor of the modern blue Army Service Uniform. Khaki Summer Service Uniform. A lighter tan uniform worn in warmer climates and tropical deployments throughout the mid-20th century, offering a cooler alternative to heavier wool service dress in places like the Philippines and later Vietnam. M1965 Field Jacket. An enormously long-serving field jacket introduced during Vietnam that remained in some form of use for decades afterward. Prized by soldiers for its practical design, even as newer camouflage patterns were printed onto essentially the same silhouette. Battle Dress Uniform Desert Variant Testing Patterns. Several experimental desert patterns were tested throughout the 1970s and 1980s in anticipation of potential Middle Eastern deployments. Most never issued in large numbers, but directly informing the eventual Gulf War-era desert patterns. Rapid Fielding Initiative gear, a supplementary equipment and clothing package fielded specifically for troops deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, addressing urgent combat lessons the standard supply system hadn't yet caught up with. Combat uniform insect guard variants. Specialized permethrin-treated uniform. Fabric introduced to reduce insect-borne disease among troops deployed to regions with heavy mosquito and tick exposure. A quiet but genuinely significant improvement in soldier health that rarely gets mentioned alongside flashier camouflage pattern changes. Flame-resistant Army combat uniform. Introduced during the Afghanistan War specifically to protect soldiers from the devastating burn injuries caused by improvised explosive devices. This fabric technology represented one of the most directly life-saving uniform innovations of the entire War on Terror era. From the plain olive drab wool that clothed soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy to the carefully field-tested Scorpion patterned soldiers wear today. The story of American Army uniforms is really the story of an institution slowly, sometimes painfully, learning that camouflage isn't just aesthetic. It's a genuine matter of soldiers' survival. The Universal Pattern disaster cost the Army real money and, more importantly, real credibility. A uniform rushed to market without the combat testing that every successful pattern before and after it actually required. Today's operational camouflage pattern exists specifically because the Army finally learned to trust the soldiers already wearing something that worked in the field, rather than designing camouflage in a laboratory and hoping it translated to an actual battlefield. 8 decades of uniforms, and the most important lesson may be the simplest one. Ask the people who actually have to wear it into combat.